Welcome to the Solemn Tones channel. How about we give some free epic upgrades to our existing customers? So as of the release of this video, every single Mjolnir, Odin or Loki customer should have received an email with new download links for these plugins. And these download links will give you the installers for Mjolnir v3, Odin 2, and Loki Bass v3. If you for some reason haven't received your email, be sure to check your spam folder, and if it's not there, simply send a message to our Solemn Tones Facebook page with your first name, last name, order number, email address, and the product you didn't receive. If you only bought Mjolnir, you're only gonna get Mjolnir. I think that's pretty obvious by itself. So how about I show you some of the new features and upgrades we made to these products. Now the first thing you will probably notice is that all the products got a major UI upgrade. Beyond that though, every single plugin got some other improvements as well. I'll start with the plugin that has the least amount of new toys, and that is Mjolnir Drums. So Mjolnir Drums basically has all the same knobs as it used to have. Mixing, if you want to change all the individual pieces. It still has invert pan, everything is still in the same spot. You still have the humanize knob. There's one change actually inside routing. So we used to have one preset loader here, which allows you to change between separate outputs and one output, but now we have a second preset with MIDI maps. So let's say you're very used to the MIDI map of Superior Drummer or Steven Slate. You can now actually load different MIDI maps and that way use the mapping you're used to. So right here we have Mjolnir, we have Better Percussionist, and we have Steven Slate to the barbecue. Beyond that, we also improved the cymbal samples a little bit to make them a little bit less harsh in some places. So Mjolnir got the UI upgrade, the cymbal improvements, and the MIDI map preset loader. Now, getting into Loki's upgrades, however, that may be a little bit more aggressive. As you can see, we have the UI upgrade and we also have the same knobs, apart from this little smooth button. When I produce things, I like everything to be as easy as possible. And so sometimes when you're working with bass, especially with a very clanky tone, higher notes can sometimes stick out. And now that is realistic for a bass because higher notes just cut through a mix a bit easier. They can just spike out a little. But I don't always want that extra realism. I sometimes just want my bass to support the mix but not stick out in any way. So what the smooth function does is on higher notes, it will decrease treble, so that the bass is always this fundamental layer at the bottom and doesn't peak out as much. So if you're like me and you want the bass to just do that and nothing else, you can turn on smooth. If you want your bass to be untouched, you can turn off smooth. Apart from that, we added one more tone. Back when Loki was released, you had Maxim's bass, which is a very clanky, dirty, dark glass-based tone. You had finger picking, and then you had the raw DI. Well, now we also introduced processed and clanky. It's not really that clanky, I just like the name this way. Overall, it is more of a solid, less dirty tone than Maxim's bass. So if you just want something very smooth, again, just to be the fundamental of your mix and not stick out too much, I think processed and clanky will be even more to your taste. So now Loki Bass comes with 2 pre-processed tones instead of 1. Finally, we're getting to the plugin that got the most major overhaul. Now I will say every one of these plugins will be getting their own videos as well with guides, manuals, all kinds of little tricks like that. But for now I'm just giving you a quick overview so you can dive right in after downloading and not be like, whoa, what are all these new options? So when loading Odin, you will now have way more presets than previously. You used to have just panned rhythms. That has now been split up into panned rhythms essential and panned rhythms expanded. Basically, sometimes when you're producing, you don't really need the slides and the bends and all the special articulations that don't come up that often. At that point, they're using up processing power of your computer, even though you're not going to be using them. So now you can load panned rhythms essential and not have those articulations be live all the time. Of course, we also have the same thing for panned leads. One feature that isn't immediately noticeable in the UI right here is the fact that Odin 2, unlike Odin Deluxe, goes down to double drop C. So not just drop C or drop F like Odin Deluxe. It goes down 1 octave below drop C. That is really, really low. Apart from that, we also have triple the amount of round robin it used to have. So on quicker notes in succession, like in tremolo picking or like in faster chords in a chorus, it will sound even more human. As for buttons, we still have Swift mode. We added crank, just like on Loki Bass. You now no longer have to worry about the velocities of your notes unless you're trying to access certain kinds of articulations. And we also added info, which is just our key switches. One interesting thing is that the info pane will also show you which key switches are active at what point in time. Back when we introduced Swift mode, not everyone realized that certain key switches turned off when Swift mode is on. So now, as you turn Swift mode on and off, you will be able to see which key switches you will be losing out on. As you can notice from the info pane right here, we also added a new key switch, tremolo mode. When you're tremolo picking and you have loads of notes in rapid succession, guitar samplers can sometimes start sounding less human and less real. Tremolo mode will essentially add all kinds of inconsistencies and imperfections, which will make that sound more real. And then you will have one more control inside the advanced menu where you can really start tweaking this. You can also see that we added the humanize button, which we first introduced in Mjolnir Drums, then in Loki Bass, and now it's finally part of Odin as well. But since we were speaking of advanced mode earlier, let's get into that. One of the design philosophies inside all Solemn Tones products has always been that everything needs to be easy. The second you load it up, it needs to sound ready, and you have to have a minimum amount of tweaking to get a great sound. The problem is that some people love tweaking, and that's where the advanced settings come in. So when you click the advanced button, you will get to a second screen with a few extra controls. First of all, we have bend intensity. When you use pitch bend modulation inside your MIDI controls or piano roll, you can draw what your note does, and the note can follow whatever you just drew. Whether it's realistic or unrealistic, that is up to you. But some people like to draw very big lines, and other people draw very small ones. And so what bend intensity allows you to do is control how aggressively Odin bends as you draw. So maybe if you're used to making very small movements, but you want those movements to matter, you can up the bend intensity and that way find that perfect spot where the bends sound right to you. Next, we have decay intensity. Now, as you know, Odin sounds massive and aggressive. That is what it was designed for. Just big metalcore and djent, those giant riffs and chugs. That's what it's made for. But sometimes you may not want that. So what decay intensity does is it affects the decay and the attack of the notes in a way that allows you to control how in the face these notes really get. So I personally will always keep this off. But if you're someone who prefers to play with that, now you can. We also introduced tremolo intensity. As I said earlier, we now have a tremolo mode, which adds inconsistency and imperfection to quick successive notes. Tremolo intensity allows you to control how imperfect and inconsistent this really gets. Now, it will never become absolutely sloppy because that's not usable, but as you play around with this, you will quickly notice the kinds of differences this introduces. Two buttons you may still recognize are raw mode and octave drop. Octave drop does just the same thing as it did in Odin Deluxe. It allows you to have Odin play in a different octave so that MIDI coming from Guitar Pro and Tug's guitar is in the correct octave for Odin and you don't have to transpose it manually. Raw mode adds some human imperfection, little sounds so that everything sounds extra real, especially useful on leads or when there's some silence. And then a new button is force phase. One thing inside guitars is that once you start editing really tight to the grid, you may run into phase issues. This is true for real guitars when editing really hard, comping really hard, but this is also true for guitar samplers. This hasn't been a major issue for Odin, but sometimes issues can just arise, and that bothers me. So we now have a force phase button, which means that when you hear any kind of phasing that wasn't introduced by your amp sim or something non-Odin related, you can click force phase and phase issues should disappear. Finally, we have latching and non-latching. This will affect how key switches behave. On Odin for Contact and Odin Deluxe, once you press in a key switch, it will remain active until you turn it off again, meaning you activate the key switch for a palm mute every single note will become a palm mute until you go to regular picking again. That is a latching key switch. On the other hand, on Loki, the key switch needs to stay pressed in order to have a certain articulation going. This latching, non-latching toggle allows you to control how Odin 2 behaves in that way. So whether you prefer the old Odin Deluxe way or the Loki way, this button will allow you to choose that. I personally prefer the Loki way because it doesn't allow you to accidentally toggle on a wrong key switch and then have to go figure out why it happened. But regardless, now you have the option to choose which workflow you prefer. These were all the upgrades we did to Mjolnir, Loki, and Odin. I hope you enjoy. As I said, I will be doing some in-depth product overviews, but I hope at least this little introduction gets you going with these updates. Finally, as briefly mentioned before, these should be in your mailbox right now. Make sure to check your spam folder and then you should be able to download them. If they are not, message the Solemn Tones Facebook page with your first name, last name, order number, email address, and the product that you previously bought, of which the update is missing, and we will make sure that you receive it shortly. That is all for today. Hope you enjoy.